It takes exactly 2 milliliters of saliva to blow up a 26-year lie. Growing up, I thought I was just the black sheep of a perfect wealthy family. I was wrong. I wasn't the black sheep. I was the stolen property my mother used to trap her husband. Caroline didn't mother, she curated. If you walked into my childhood home, a sprawling, sterile monolith of glass and white oak in upstate New York, you would immediately understand what I mean. Everything had a place. The minimalist Italian furniture, the absurdly expensive abstract art that looked like a panic attack on canvas, the hydrangeas that were swapped out every Tuesday morning by a silent florist. And then there was the family portrait hanging in the great room. Arthur, my father, stood tall and imposing, his silver hair catching the studio light, exuding the quiet, passive wealth of a man who inherited millions and managed not to lose it. Next to him sat Caroline, my mother, blonde, impossibly thin, with a smile that looked less like an expression of joy and more like a threat. And leaning against her knee was Blair. Blair was the golden child. Born 2 years after me, she was a flawless, carbon copy miniature of Caroline. Same icy blue eyes, same straight golden hair, same effortless ability to exist in a space without disrupting it. And then, off to the side, standing with rigid posture and a forced, uncomfortable grimace, was me, Harper. I was the smudge on Caroline's pristine canvas. I had thick, unruly dark hair that refused to be tamed by the expensive stylist she dragged me to. My eyes were a muddy hazel. My build was athletic, broad-shouldered, and entirely unsuited for the delicate, doll-like designer dresses she forced over my head. From the moment I gained consciousness, I knew I was a disappointment. It wasn't something Caroline ever said out loud. It was in the microscopic flinch when she hugged me. It was in the way she would lick her thumb to wipe a speck of dirt off my cheek, her eyes scanning my face with a look of profound, exhausted confusion. "How did you come from me?" her eyes seemed to ask. For the first 18 years of my life, I internalized that look. I assumed genetics had played a cruel joke on us both. I assumed I was a recessive throwback to some burly, unrefined ancestor on Arthur's side. "You're just willful," Caroline used to say, sighing as she watched me track mud across the foyer. "I don't know where you get this feral energy. Certainly not from me." Arthur tried, in his own emotionally stunted way. He bought me a drum set when I was 12, which Caroline promptly relegated to the soundproof basement. He paid for my lacrosse gear. But Arthur was a ghost of a father, always flying off to London or Tokyo, preferring the predictable chaos of corporate mergers over the silent, freezing war zone of his own living room. Growing up, I developed a thick skin coated in cynicism. It was my armor. If I couldn't be the perfect daughter, I would be the detached observer. I watched Blair learn to manipulate Caroline with sweet smiles and feigned helplessness. I watched Caroline orchestrate dinner parties like a military general, obsessed with the perception of perfection. The older I got, the more I felt like a foreign exchange student who had overstayed her visa. I left for college on the West Coast the second I could and rarely looked back. I became a graphic designer, built a life in Seattle, and reduced my family interactions to obligatory Thanksgiving dinners and scheduled 15-minute Sunday phone calls. I accepted my role as the odd one out. I thought I had made peace with the emotional chasm between me and the woman who birthed me. But peace is a fragile thing. It only takes one crack to bring the whole dam down. The crack started with a benign cyst on my ovary. I was 26. My doctor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Dr. Eris, sat across from me holding my chart. "It's nothing to panic about," she said, tapping her pen. "But given your age and the fact that these specific types of cysts can occasionally have a genetic link to certain ovarian cancers, I'd like to run a full genetic panel." "Do you have a history of ovarian or breast cancer in your family?" "No," I replied instantly. "My mom's side is clear. My grandmother lived to be 90. "What about your father's side?" "Also clear." Dr. Eris nodded, typing it in. "All right. Let's do a panel anyway, just to be safe. You can also do a standard commercial DNA kit if you want to look at the broader ancestral health markers. It's good data to have." It was an offhand comment, a routine medical suggestion. But as I walked out of that clinic into the gray Seattle drizzle, an irritating, persistent itch started in the back of my brain. A commercial DNA kit. Blair had done one 2 years ago, sponsored by some influencer brand deal she was chasing. She had bragged about being 80% Northwestern European, showing off her little pie charts on Instagram. I didn't care about my ancestry, but a dark, cynical part of me thought it would be deeply funny to take the test, get my results, and finally pinpoint exactly which European peasant I had inherited my broad shoulders and dark hair from. I wanted to text Caroline the results and say, "Here, this is the genetic trash that ruined your aesthetic." So, I ordered a kit, $20 on sale. When it arrived in its little brightly colored box, I didn't feel a sense of impending doom. I didn't hear ominous music playing in the background. I was sitting on my couch, half watching a cooking show, eating cold Thai takeout. I opened the plastic wrapping, took out the plastic vial, and spat into it. I closed the lid, releasing the stabilizing fluid. I put it in the prepaid envelope, tossed it in the blue mailbox on my corner the next morning, and entirely forgot about it. I was so incredibly stupid. I had just handed a lit match to a powder keg, and I didn't even bother to watch it burn. The email arrived on a Tuesday. It was 10:15 a.m. I was at my desk, slogging through a logo redesign for a pretentious organic coffee startup. My phone buzzed on the desk. A notification from the DNA testing company. "Your results are ready." I clicked the link, took a sip of my lukewarm coffee, and waited for the dashboard to load. I bypassed the health markers, doctor. Aris had already cleared me on the medical side and clicked straight to the Ancestry and Relatives tab. I was ready for the pie charts. I was ready to see the breakdown of whatever mutt lineage had made me the family gargoyle. The screen populated. Ancestry composition. 45% Eastern European, 30% Mediterranean, 25% unknown, broadly European. I frowned. That was weird. Blair's results had been heavily British and French. I knew siblings didn't inherit the exact same genetic mix recombination was a lottery. After all, but a complete lack of overlap seemed statistically improbable. Arthur's family was strictly English nobility wannabes. Caroline's family was French, Canadian, and Scottish. Where the hell did the Mediterranean come from? I clicked on the DNA Relatives tab, expecting to see Blair's profile pop up at the top. She had her account set to public. I knew this because she had complained about second cousins messaging her for money. The page loaded. Closest relatives. 1. Sarah Miller, mother. Match. 49.8%. 2. Beatrice Miller, aunt. Match 24.2%. 3. David Rossi, first cousin. Match 12.1%. I stared at the screen. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Sarah Miller. Mother. My breath hitched, catching sharply in my throat. I moved my mouse over the name, my hand suddenly trembling. It had to be a glitch. A server error. The company had probably mixed up my barcode with someone else's. That happened, right? People got the wrong spit tubes. They processed thousands of these a day. I scrolled down. I searched the list for Blair Montgomery. Nothing. I searched for Arthur Montgomery. Nothing. I felt a cold prickle of sweat break out along my hairline. The air in my office suddenly felt thin, as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out through the air vents. I clicked on the profile for Sarah Miller. It was a bare-bones account, no picture. Just a location. Syracuse, New York. Syracuse. I was born in Syracuse. At St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, Arthur and Caroline had been passing through the state, visiting Arthur's ailing father, when Caroline went into early labor. That was the family lore. It was the only time Caroline had ever looked mildly inconvenienced by my existence in a story. "You couldn't even wait until we were back in the city," she would say. "You forced me to give birth in a regional hospital with linoleum floors." My heart began to hammer, a frantic, violent rhythm against my ribs. "Okay, Harper, breathe," I whispered to the empty room. "It's a mistake." Or Arthur isn't my dad. That was the logical conclusion, wasn't it? An affair. Caroline, the icy perfectionist, had slipped up. She'd had an affair with a Mediterranean man, got pregnant, and passed me off as Arthur's. It explained why I looked so different. It explained why she resented me. I was the living, breathing proof of her infidelity. But wait, I looked back at the screen. Sarah Miller, mother. If Caroline had an affair, the DNA test would still show Caroline as my mother, or at least it would show Blair as my half-sister. But Blair wasn't on the list at all. And then the secondary realization hit me, hitting me so hard I felt physically nauseous. If Caroline wasn't my mother, and Arthur wasn't my father, who was I? I spent the next 6 hours in a manic fugue state. I abandoned my design work. I locked my office door. I turned into a deranged private investigator fueled by panic and black coffee. I searched Sarah Miller Syracuse NY online. Hundreds of results. Too broad. I added 1,998, my birth year. Still too broad. I opened Facebook, typing in Beatrice Miller, the aunt. After an hour of scrolling through dead ends, I found her. Beatrice Miller. Lives in Syracuse. I clicked on her profile. Her header image was a picture of two women in their late 50s, smiling on a porch. I zoomed in on the woman on the left. I stopped breathing entirely. It was like looking into a funhouse mirror that showed the future. The woman had my thick, unruly dark hair, though hers was peppered with gray. She had my broad shoulders. She had the exact same heavy-lidded, muddy hazel eyes. She had my jawline. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a mix-up at the lab. This woman was my mother, my biological mother. My mind violently rejected the information, even as my eyes confirmed it. No, that doesn't happen. Babies don't just get swapped. This wasn't a soap opera. This was real life. Hospital protocols in 1998 were strict. They had ankle monitors. They had footprints. You don't just go home with the wrong baby. Unless, my brain flashed back to Caroline. Caroline, who demanded perfection. Caroline, who controlled every variable in her life with a suffocating grip. Caroline, whose husband was notoriously impatient and demanded an heir to solidify his trust fund payout. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number for St. Jude's Memorial Hospital in Syracuse. I navigated the automated menus until I got to medical records. Hi. My voice shook. I cleared my throat. Hi. I'm trying to get a copy of my birth records. Born the 14th of October, 1998. Mother's name, Caroline Montgomery. Of course, honey, a tired receptionist said. I can put in a request. It usually takes a few weeks by mail, and we need a copy of your ID. Wait, I said, desperation leaking into my tone. Can you just look in the system? Can you just tell me if there was another baby born that day? A baby to a Sarah Miller? Ma'am, I can't give out patient information. Please, I begged, the cynicism cracking, leaving only a terrified child underneath. Please, it's a matter of life and death. Just tell me if Sarah Miller gave birth on the 14th of October, 1998. There was a long silence. I heard the clacking of a keyboard. I'm breaking protocol here, the woman muttered. Let me see. 1,998. Miller, Sarah. Yes. Admitted October 13th. Delivered October 14th. The floor beneath my desk seemed to vanish. Did the baby go home with her? Another pause. Slower this time. Ma'am, I really shouldn't be looking at this. But no. The file says the infant. The infant passed away due to a congenital heart defect 4 hours after delivery. I dropped the phone. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack, but the sound was drowned out by the roaring in my ears. Sarah Miller's baby died. Caroline Montgomery went home with me. There was no accidental swap. You don't accidentally take home a healthy baby when yours is dead. You don't accidentally leave a grieving mother to bury an infant that wasn't hers. Caroline didn't have an affair. Caroline didn't adopt me. Caroline stole me. A guttural sob ripped out of my throat, violent and uncontrollable. 26 years of feeling inadequate. 26 years of wondering why my mother looked at me like I was a stranger. 26 years of agonizing over a lack of connection that I thought was my fault. She wasn't looking at me like I was a stranger. She was looking at me like I was a ghost, a prop, a stolen piece of jewelry she had to wear every day to keep her husband from leaving her. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't tell my boss I was leaving. I walked out of my apartment, drove to SeaTac Airport, and bought a one-way ticket to New York. I was going to burn the canvas down. The Montgomery estate looked exactly as it always did, imposing, quiet, and suffocatingly pristine. It was Sunday morning, 10 a.m., the time of the Holy Montgomery family brunch. I pulled my rental car into the circular driveway, the tires crunching loudly against the imported gravel. It was a brisk, gray October morning. The sky looked bruised. It felt fitting. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. I looked deranged. My dark hair was a tangled mess, my eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot, and I was wearing the same sweatpants and hoodie I had flown in. In my right hand, gripped so tightly my knuckles were white, was a manila folder containing 50 pages of printed DNA records, Facebook photos, and a hastily acquired digital death certificate for baby girl Miller. I didn't knock. I bypassed the heavy oak front door and went around to the terrace, sliding open the glass doors that led directly into the sunroom. They were there, just like a painting. Arthur sat at the head of the long glass table, reading the Wall Street Journal on his iPad, an espresso in his hand. Blair was across from him, manicured fingers tapping away on her phone, bathed in the soft morning light. And Caroline was standing by the marble island in the adjoining kitchen, arranging white orchids in a crystal vase. They all froze when I walked in. "Harper?" Arthur said, lowering his iPad, his brow furrowing in genuine shock. "What on earth? You didn't tell us you were flying in." Blair looked up, her blue eyes scanning my disheveled appearance. She wrinkled her nose. "Are you okay? You look like you slept in a dumpster." Caroline didn't say a word. She set the orchid stem down slowly, her eyes locking onto mine. I saw it instantly. That microscopic tightening around her eyes. The defensive posture. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel inferior under her gaze. I felt a cold, terrifying power. "Harper," Caroline said, her voice smooth, heavily modulated to hide the annoyance. "What a surprise. Let me have Maria set another plate." "Don't," I said. My voice was raspy, hollowed out by crying and airplane air. I walked directly to the glass table. I slammed the manila folder down on the glass. The smack echoed sharply through the cavernous room. Blair jumped. Arthur took off his reading glasses. "What is this?" Arthur asked, reaching for the folder. "Don't touch it yet," I said, looking only at Caroline. "I want her to explain it first." Caroline wiped her hands on a linen towel, walking slowly toward the table. "Explain what, Harper? Are you having some sort of episode? Because if you need money for rehab or something..." "I took a DNA test, Caroline," I said. I used her first name. I had never done that in my life. The syllables felt like ash in my mouth. Caroline stopped walking. It was fascinating to watch the human body betray itself. Caroline Montgomery was a master of control. But in that exact second, all the blood drained from her face, leaving her a sickly, chalky white. Her eyes darted from my face to the folder, and for a fraction of a second, her mask slipped. I saw raw, unfiltered terror. "A DNA test?" Blair scoffed, oblivious to the shift in the room's gravity. "I did one of those 2 years ago. They're so stupid. Did you find out you're part Neanderthal? Because honestly, that would explain." "Shut up, Blair," I snapped, not breaking eye contact with Caroline. Arthur stood up, his authoritative aura kicking in. "Harper, watch your tone. What is going on here? Why are you looking at your mother like that?" "She's not my mother," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. It was thick and heavy, pressing against my eardrums. Outside, the wind rattled the terrace glass. "Harper," Caroline whispered. Her voice trembled. Just a fraction, but I heard it. "You're upset. You're confused. Those tests, they're notoriously inaccurate. It's a scam. Just a data mining scam." "So, you know what's in the folder?" I asked, taking a step toward her. You know it says I have 0% genetic match to Blair? You know it says I have zero match to Arthur? Arthur looked at Caroline, a deep frown carving lines into his face. Caroline? What is she talking about? Is this a joke? It's not a joke, I said, picking up the top sheet of paper. I held it up. My biological mother's name is Sarah Miller. She lives in Syracuse. She gave birth in St. Jude's on the 14th of October, 1998. The exact same day you gave birth, Caroline, in the exact same hospital. Stop, Caroline said, her voice rising, sharp and jagged. Arthur, tell her to stop. She's hysterical. Let her speak, Arthur said softly, his eyes fixed on his wife. He was a smart man. He had seen the terror in her face. The businessman in him recognized a bluff, and his wife was bluffing. I pulled the medical records, I continued, stepping closer to Caroline. I wanted to be right in her face. I wanted to smell her expensive perfume mixed with her fear. Sarah Miller's baby died, Caroline, 4 hours after birth. A congenital heart defect. But Sarah Miller's baby is my biological match. I slammed the paper back down onto the glass. You didn't just have an affair, I said, my voice dropping to a vicious whisper. You didn't adopt me. Your baby died, Caroline. Your baby with Arthur died. And instead of telling your husband, instead of grieving, you walked down the hall and you took me. No, Caroline screamed. It was an ugly, primal sound. It shocked me. It shocked Arthur. Blair let out a quiet gasp, pressing her hands to her mouth. Caroline lunged forward, grabbing the folder, trying to rip the papers in half. I grabbed her wrist. I squeezed it hard. The years of lacrosse, the broad shoulders she hated so much they made me twice as strong as her. Don't, I hissed. The files are backed up. The lab results are online. You can't shred this away. You can't hire a decorator to cover it up. Arthur grabbed Caroline's other arm, pulling her back. Caroline, look at me. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a devastating weight. Look at me. Caroline was shaking violently. Her perfect hair had fallen across her face. She looked wild, hunted. She looked at Arthur, tears finally spilling over her mascara. Arthur, please, you have to understand, she sobbed, grasping at his cashmere sweater. You were in London. We had been trying for years, you said. You said if we couldn't have a child, you didn't know if this marriage would survive. Arthur stepped back as if he had been physically struck. I meant the stress, Caroline, the IVF. I didn't mean I would leave you. You wanted an heir, Caroline shrieked, the ugly truth finally bursting out like pus from a lanced wound. Your father was dying. He was going to leave the estate to your brother. The baby was born, and she was blue, Arthur. She was so small, and she was blue, and the doctors took her away, and then a nurse came in and said she was gone. Caroline turned to me, her eyes manic, devoid of any maternal warmth, filled only with the desperate justification of a cornered animal. I walked out of my room, she confessed, her voice shaking with adrenaline. It was 3 a.m. There was an emergency in the ER. The maternity ward was empty, just the babies in the nursery. And you were crying. You were right next to the window. Your tag said Miller. I went in. I took my baby's ankle tag, the dead one, and I put it on you. And I wrapped you in a blanket and walked back to my room. She said it so simply, as if she was explaining how she swapped a defective pair of shoes at a department store. A woman grieved a dead child because of you, I said, my voice breaking. The tears I had been fighting finally spilled over. A mother buried a baby that wasn't hers. You let her hold a dead blue baby and think it was the one she carried for 9 months. I did it for us, Caroline screamed, turning back to Arthur. I saved our marriage. I gave you a child. You gave me a stranger, Arthur roared. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard him make. It shook the glass in the window panes. Arthur stared at the woman he had been married to for 30 years. The horror in his eyes was absolute. He wasn't looking at a wife. He was looking at a monster. Blair was openly sobbing now, curled into a tight ball in her chair. I stepped back. The truth was out. The bomb had detonated. The perfect Montgomery family was standing in the ruins of their pristine sunroom, bleeding out from a lie that had festered for 2.5 decades. "I spent my entire life wondering why you couldn't love me," I said softly to Caroline, who was now weeping on the floor at Arthur's feet. "I thought I was broken, but you couldn't love me because every time you looked at me, I reminded you of the sick, twisted thing you did." I turned my back on them. I walked toward the glass door. "Harper," Arthur called out, his voice cracking. "Harper, wait." I didn't turn around. "I'm going to Syracuse," I said over my shoulder. "Don't ever contact me again." I slid the glass door shut, leaving the wreckage behind. The crisp autumn air hit my face, and for the first time in 26 years, I took a breath that felt entirely, unequivocally mine. The adrenaline left my body somewhere around Albany. It didn't fade gradually. It dropped out from under me like a trap door, leaving me violently shivering in the driver's seat of my rented sedan. I had to pull over onto the shoulder of Interstate 90. I threw the car into park, leaned my forehead against the cold steering wheel, and dry heaved until my ribs ached. I was entirely untethered. My last name was a forgery. My childhood was a crime scene. The man who had bought me a drum set and paid for my college was a victim of the exact same kidnapping I was. But beneath the nausea and the profound, world-shattering shock, there was something else. A quiet, steady hum vibrating in my chest. Clarity. For 26 years, I had believed I was a broken puzzle piece, trying to jam myself into the wrong puzzle. Now, I knew the truth. I wasn't broken. I had just been stolen from my own box. I put the car back in drive. I merged onto the highway. I drove. It took 4 hours to reach Syracuse. The GPS guided me away from the manicured highways and into a quiet, older suburb. The streets were lined with massive oak trees, shedding wet brown leaves across the asphalt. There were no wrought iron security gates here, no imported gravel, just cracked sidewalks, driveways stained with motor oil, and kids' bicycles left abandoned on front lawns. The automated voice in my phone chimed, "Your destination is on the right." I pulled up to the curb and parked. It was a 2-story craftsman house, painted a faded slate blue. The white trim around the windows was peeling slightly. A heavy wooden porch swing hung from chains near the front door, swaying in the damp October wind. In the front yard, a cluster of overgrown, untamed hydrangeas drooped under the weight of the autumn chill. They weren't perfectly pruned or swapped out on Tuesdays. They were just surviving the season. I sat in the car for 20 minutes. My hands were clamped onto the steering wheel. My breathing was shallow and fast. I had charged into the Montgomery estate like a wrecking ball because I had anger to fuel me. I had 26 years of resentment pushing me through those glass doors. But I had no anger for the woman inside this blue house. I only had a terrifying, hollow desperation. What if she didn't want me? What if the trauma of losing a child had broken her so completely that the truth would only destroy whatever peace she had managed to build? "You owe her the truth," a voice in my head whispered. Caroline stole her grief too. I grabbed the manila folder from the passenger seat. I got out of the car. My legs felt like lead. Every step up the concrete walkway felt like walking underwater. I climbed the 3 wooden steps to the porch. There was a brass doorbell, dull with age. I didn't press it. I raised my fist and knocked twice on the heavy wooden door. A dog barked somewhere inside. Golden retriever, sounded like. I heard footsteps approaching. Heavy, normal footsteps. Not the silent, gliding walk of the Montgomery estate staff. The deadbolt clicked. The door swung open. "Quiet, Buster. Sit down," a woman's voice said, looking down at the dog before looking up at me. The air vanished from my lungs. Sarah Miller stood in the doorway. She was wearing faded denim jeans and a thick, oversized wool cardigan over a plain gray t-shirt. She held a mug of tea in one hand. She was shorter than I expected, but her shoulders were broad. Her jawline was sharp, and her eyes. I was staring into a mirror that had been aged 30 years. She had my exact, heavy-lidded, muddy, hazel eyes. She had the same unruly dark hair, though hers was cut into a bob and threaded heavily with silver. She took a sip of her tea, her brow furrowing slightly as she looked at me. Then she stopped mid-swallow. The mug hovered near her mouth. Her eyes widened, scanning my face, my shoulders, my hair. I watched her brain misfire, trying to process the visual impossibility standing on her welcome mat. I saw a ghost pass over her features, a deeply buried, heavily scarred over memory fighting its way to the surface. Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was raspy. It sounded just like mine when I had a cold. "Sarah Miller?" I asked. She nodded slowly, her grip tightening on the mug. "Yes. Who are you?" I swallowed hard. The cynical armor I had worn my entire life dissolved into absolute nothingness. I was just a terrified girl standing on a porch. "My name is Harper," I said, my voice trembling. "I was born on the 14th of October, 1998, at St. Jude's Memorial Hospital." Sarah flinched. It was a violent, full-body flinch. The tea splashed over the rim of her mug, burning her knuckles, but she didn't seem to notice. "Who sent you?" she asked, her tone instantly dropping into a harsh, defensive whisper. "Is this a sick joke? Because if this is some kind of scam—" "It's not a scam," I interrupted, taking a tiny step backward to give her space. "I have medical records. I have a DNA test." "You did a commercial DNA test 2 years ago, right? Under your name?" She stared at me, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "My niece bought me one for Christmas." "So what? What do you want from me?" I held out the manila folder. My hand was shaking so badly, the paper rustled. "I took one too," I said. 3 weeks ago, I just got the results. It says you're my mother." "My baby died," Sarah said, her voice cracking. The words were a shield, a heavy, iron shield she had held up for nearly 3 decades. "My baby girl died 4 hours after she was born. Her heart failed. I held her. I buried her. I don't know who you are or why you look like me, but you need to leave." She moved to shut the door. "Her name was Caroline Montgomery," I shouted, wedging my sneaker into the door frame. Sarah stopped. "The woman in the room down the hall from you," I said, the words spilling out of me in a frantic rush. "Caroline Montgomery. She delivered a baby the exact same day. Her baby died. She went into the nursery in the middle of the night. She switched the tags. She took you an infant that had already passed away, and she walked out of the hospital with me." Sarah let go of the door. The heavy ceramic mug slipped from her fingers. It shattered against the hardwood floor of the entryway, sending hot tea and shards of pottery scattering across the rug. She didn't look at the mess. She was looking at me, really looking at me. She looked at my broad shoulders. She looked at the shape of my nose. She looked at the wild, untamable dark hair that Caroline had spent thousands of dollars trying to straighten into submission. "No," Sarah whispered. Her legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees right there in the entryway, uncaring of the broken ceramic. The golden retriever whined, nudging her shoulder with his snout. I dropped the folder. I fell to my knees right in front of her. "I'm here," I said, tears finally streaming down my face, hot and fast. "I'm right here. She didn't die. I'm right here." We sat on the floor of her entryway for an hour. I didn't try to explain the intricacies of the Montgomery estate. I didn't tell her about the cold, sterile mansion or the abstract art. I just opened the folder and laid the papers out on the floor, right next to the puddle of spilled tea. Sarah read every single line. She read the DNA match percentage. She read the medical records from St. Jude's. She read the admission timestamps that proved Caroline Montgomery and Sarah Miller were on the maternity floor at the exact same time. Her hands traced the printed letters as if they were Braille. She was weeping, but it wasn't the loud, theatrical sobbing I had seen from Blair a few hours earlier. It was a silent, agonizing leak of 26 years of misplaced grief. "My husband." "Tom," she whispered, her voice rough with emotion, her finger tracing the edge of the DNA printout. "He died 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. He went to his grave thinking we failed, thinking his genetics, his heart defect had killed our only chance at a child. We never tried again. We were too scared. A fresh wave of hatred for Caroline washed over me, hot and toxic. Caroline hadn't just stolen a baby. She had stolen a marriage's joy. She had stolen a father's peace. She had derailed an entire family tree just to keep a rich man from leaving her. "I'm sorry," I choked out. "I'm so sorry." "Why are you apologizing?" Sarah looked up from the papers. Her eyes, red and swollen, locked onto mine. "You were a day old." "Because I grew up in a mansion," I said, the guilt suddenly suffocating me. "Because I had a trust fund and private schools, and you were here, grieving a grave with the wrong baby in it." Sarah reached out. It was a slow, hesitant movement. Her hand trembled as it crossed the space between us. When Caroline used to touch me, it was always a correction, a tug on my collar, a push of my posture. Sarah's hand gently touched my cheek. Her skin was warm. Her palm was slightly calloused. "You think I care about mansions?" she whispered. Her thumb brushed away a tear from my jawline. "I have looked at a granite headstone for 26 years. Every birthday, every Christmas. I bought a cake every October 14th and ate it alone in the dark. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the rich woman who took you. She'll have to answer to God, or the police, or whoever comes first." She leaned in closer, both of her hands coming up to cradle my face. "You're breathing," she said, letting out a wet, broken laugh. "You're breathing. You're real. You have Tom's broad shoulders. You have my terrible hair." Caroline hated the hair. I sniffled, a weak smile pulling at the corner of my mouth. "Caroline is an idiot," Sarah said fiercely. And then she pulled me against her. It was the first real hug I had ever received in my life. There was no hesitation. There was no stiff, awkward posturing. It was desperate, grounding, and overwhelmingly fiercely protective. I buried my face in her wool cardigan. She smelled like laundry detergent and Earl Grey tea. She smelled like a home I had never known. I closed my eyes, wrapping my arms around her. The cynical, detached observer inside me, the armor I had worn my entire life to survive, the Montgomerys finally fractured and fell away entirely. I wept into my mother's shoulder, mourning the years we had lost, and fiercely grasping the ones we had left. The perfect fake family in New York was burning to the ground. Let it burn. I had finally found my way out of the ashes. If this story shook you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always finds a way out of the dark. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive story. Have you ever uncovered a massive family secret? Drop your experiences in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, stay grounded, stay cynical, and trust your gut.